We get a lot of our theology from Christmas cards, unfortunately. But my favorite story, Christmas story, and we see this a lot on Christmas cards too, is the wise men. The story starts 500 years before Christ. In Daniel chapter 9, he prophesies, he predicts the coming of an anointed prince of Israel. The wise men, the magi in the eastern empires, Persian and Babylonian, were the kingmakers. So Daniel was the chief of them. Okay, now we come to the time of Jesus, and that's the historical setting. So these wise men from Persia knew, they still had the writings. They knew the exact time that this Jewish king would arrive. Daniel taught them that. And now these Persian kingmakers, wise men, an entourage of them come from the east to Jerusalem, want to know, where is the Jewish king? Where's the new Jewish king? We want to worship him. You don't think Herod did freak out? Hey, welcome to Church for Skeptics. We're going to talk about my favorite Christmas story today, and hopefully it'll be around Christmas time. We get a lot of our theology from Christmas cards, unfortunately, I guess. That's why a lot of people think Jesus was born on December 25th. I know there's history behind that as well. But my favorite story, Christmas story, and we see this a lot on Christmas cards too, is the wise men. I think there again, Christmas card theology would say there are only three wise men. I think there are a lot more than that. I think the three comes from the three gifts that are given, and that's important as well. But today I want to combine history and theology and prophecy. Prophecy really is just history in advance. But I want to combine those things and tell you a Christmas story about the wise men that I hope you'll be interested in. It's one of my favorites. The story starts 500 years before Christ. And I'll just give you a little bit of the history here. And you can find all this in Wikipedia, of course. I actually did find some of it on Wikipedia. The Jewish population, a good part of the Jewish population, was taken captive by the Babylonian Empire. There were 3 deportations by the Babylonians who took especially the upper crust, the more wealthy and the more educated. They left most of the poor people in Israel after the besieging there and destroying the temple and the city of Jerusalem. But in 586, it was the last deportation. And among those deportations were some prophets. Ezekiel was one, and Daniel was one. And there are a lot of contemporaries. Jeremiah was kind of a little bit earlier, but they would be considered contemporaries. He stayed there as well. And even some of the minor prophets were there in the same time. But Daniel went to Babylon in almost the 6th century, almost the 600, about 580s. And he stayed there the rest of his life. And he served under, literally, very closely, 4 kings, 2 Babylonian kings and 2 Persian kings. They were Nebuchadnezzar, and there's one king I found between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. I'd never heard of him before, to be honest with you, so you might want to comment and tell me who that guy is. Obed something, I think. Anyway, I know about Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. And the interesting thing about King Cyrus is that he is prophesied 200 plus years earlier than that in the book of Isaiah. So Isaiah the prophet prophesied actually the name of Cyrus as the king and as a servant of the Lord. Very interesting there. Now in Daniel chapter 2, I'm not going to read a lot of stuff from Daniel, read the wise men in Matthew chapter 2 in here, but Daniel, and you know this, most of you know about the dreams that Nebuchadnezzar had, and the king of Babylon, and he wanted his wise men. Think about this now, we're making the connection. Nebuchadnezzar demanded that his wise men not only tell him interpret the dream, but tell them what the dream was. Of course, they couldn't do that. Daniel did that. And here's what happened as a result of that in Daniel chapter 2. So here's what Nebuchadnezzar rewarded Daniel with. And by the way, there again, Daniel was closely served 4 different kings, 2 Babylonian kings, 2 Persian kings. You might say 3 Persian kings, but I'm not familiar with one of them. So Daniel chapter 2 at the end, I'm going to start in verse 46 here. So this is after Daniel interprets the dreams, and Nebuchadnezzar says in verse 46, "Then Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery.' Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. Now watch this, he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court." That's pretty remarkable here. By the way, when you get to King Darius, the Persian king, who was the one who allowed Cyrus primarily, but Darius was a believer in Zoroastrianism. If you just go to Wikipedia, you can find all the Zoroastrian kings of Persia. And kind of a unique belief system. They believed in one God who created the universe and his nemesis, the anti-God. And so the whole thing was about the duality between good and evil. That's Zoroastrianism in a nutshell. So they weren't as far away from the teachings of Daniel. Now, Daniel stays as the chief of the wise men. He's counseling 4 kings, 2 Babylonian kings, 2 Persian kings. This is remarkable. Now, while he's there, Daniel has also the book of Jeremiah. He has that with him. Probably some connection with Ezekiel's prophecies as well. So I'm not going to go there, but in Daniel chapter 9, which is the first year of King Darius, the Persian king, Daniel prophesies pretty much 2,500, well, he's already done this with Nebuchadnezzar, 2,500 years of history, Western history. But in Daniel chapter 9, he prophesies, he predicts the coming of an anointed prince of Israel, the Jewish people. He's concerned about his own people because he reads in Jeremiah that exile is going to be 70 years. Daniel wants to know, when's this going to end, when we're going to go back to the land. Daniel never did, of course. But in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, and we won't go there even for the sake of time here, but Daniel predicts. Now keep in mind, he is the head of the wise men. Parenthetically, let me say this as well. I'm excited. I'm rambling a little bit, I know, but I love the story. The wise men, the magi in the Eastern empires, Persian and Babylonian, were the kingmakers. To become king, you were taught from day one, virtually as soon as you could learn anything, the wise men were teaching them their own cultures, their own whatever scientific knowledge they had. Of course, they were whatever religion they had, they combined them all back in those days. And so Daniel was the chief of them. He was a believer in Yahweh. Of course, he was connected with God. And so that's why all these prophecies. Now, don't you think if he is the chief magi in Babylon and in Persia, that's what he's teaching these wise men. They knew exactly what Daniel, they knew what Daniel was. Daniel was written in Persia. The book of Daniel was written in Babylon/Persia. And so now in chapter 9, he predicts, he prophesies, and even gives the exact date when this anointed king of Israel will come. I think that's remarkable right there. Now, having said all that, so we've talked about the little bit of the history, mostly the prophecies here, and that's why the story begins so much earlier, of course, than the Christmas story. Now let's talk about the history. The Persian Empire was conquered, of course, by the Greeks, but they retained some measure of their empire in two parts. You can look up this on Wikipedia's too, or Google it. The first was called the Parthian Empire, and then it was called the Sasanian Empire. Wikipedia calls it the Iranian Empire because it's, of course, geographically that's where it is. And so there were running battles between what was left of the Persian Empire and the Roman Empire when they conquered most of the world, of course. These battles now watch this. These battles started between 54 BC and lasted all the way to the 200 ADs. Now, so you got Rome, you got Persia, and there's running battles between the two, even though Rome's obviously bigger than Persia, but nonetheless, they had these running battles. Now, in the midst of that, so 54 BC all the way to the 200 AD or so, Herod the king then is a client king of Palestine, Israel, of Rome. He is the client of Rome. And Palestine, here Romans' thinking is Palestine is a buffer between Persia, Iran, the Parthians, and Rome and the West. And so that's why they want to have good relationships with Herod as the buffer between them. And Herod is a client king, off and on, because he was such a jerk. Now you have the entrance. Okay, now we come to the time of Jesus, and that's the historical setting. So these wise men from Persia they still had the writings. They knew the exact time that this Jewish king would arrive. Daniel taught them that. And so now here comes an entourage. Think about this. Herod is king. He's a buffer between the two. He's a client of Rome. And now these Persian kingmakers, wise men, an entourage of them come from the east to Jerusalem, want to know, where is the Jewish king? Where's the new Jewish king? We want to worship him. They want to form an alliance between Persia and Israel against Rome. You don't think Herod did freak out about that? Let's read Matthew chapter 2 in that light. I love this so much. Here we go, Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one that has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." This is nothing short of an alliance, a request for an alliance here. Now, that's why here it says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. And this word disturbed is a very strong word. Herod being Herod, if you know anything about him, he was beside himself in anger and frustration and fear. And then it says, and all Jerusalem with him. So this wasn't three little wise men sneaking in on their camels and going to the manger there and sneaking out. This was an entourage. They had to have had a military escort from these wise men, these Persian kingmakers coming in. And all of Jerusalem was disturbed about this. And partly, of course, was because if Herod was upset, everybody better get upset. So, keep reading here. Verse 4, Matthew chapter 2. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. He's trying to check out the same information that the Magi had. They got it from Daniel. And of course, I said there were other minor prophets in the mix there that were contemporaries of Daniel. One of them was Micah. And so he's asking the scribes, where is this he wants to know about the Bible. And so, verse 5, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet Micah has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Now, you see the plot thickening here. I mean, this is movie stuff. This is better than movie stuff. This is real stuff. Then Herod, verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find them, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Of course, he's got ulterior motives. And hence the slaughter of the innocents now. So you have these Iranian kingmakers. I just want to kind of conclude with some statements here. I think the best thing about all this is Jesus is truly, I'm convinced. I want you to be convinced that Jesus truly is the King of the world. He is the ruler that will rule forever. And these magi from the east, from Persia, had gotten their information 500 years earlier and kept it from Daniel. Now they're coming to coronate as the Gentiles. The Jews refused to coronate Jesus as king, but the Gentiles did in the form of the Magi from the east. So you have a Gentile coronation. The other neat thing is the reason we have three, we think three wise men, there are more than three, I think, but they had three gifts. And those gifts funded the sojourn of the royal family, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, to Egypt. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh were extremely valuable, and I'm sure they didn't give tidbits, they didn't give token gifts. So now what about the slaughter of the innocents? Let's keep reading here in Matthew, verse 9, chapter 2. After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child and his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. These are the kingmakers at their coronation of the king. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to the country by another route. My favorite Christmas songs is one by James Taylor called Home by Another Way. I encourage you to find that on YouTube and watch it. It's really neat. And so, because of that, of course, the escape to Egypt comes next. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, I'm on verse 13, in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Now, a lot of skeptics will say this is not, the slaughter of the innocents here is not written in any other historical document, so it must not be true. Well, let me say a couple of things there and we'll be done. First thing I will say is, given Herod's track record, Herod has one methodology to solve his problems. Kill somebody, murder. He killed his own family. So it's certainly not unusual to think this is what he would have done. He's freaked out about these magi coming. He's freaked about a king to replace him. He's freaked about getting Rome's ire against him if he's going to try to, if Persian's trying to make an allegiance here, kill him. Kill the young king, it'll be solved. He thinks that'll solve the problem. So just from historical methodology, it just seems like that would be logical. The other thing is, even though this is not written in another document, don't mess with the history of the New Testament. I know it does; they do that all the time. But it's in Bethlehem, there might have been 200 people there. There might have only been a dozen children under the age of 2 that they killed. Of course, still a horrible thing, but it just didn't make the historical records except in the New Testament. And I'm going to say this, and I know I'll get flack from it. Don't mess with the New Testament history. It will show you up in the end. Merry Christmas. Thanks for watching.